So maybe while I'm pulling all of this up for all of you, if you wouldn't mind in the chat, now that we've started and kicked off the fall, today being the first day, if you want to go ahead and share in the chat, maybe your favorite food or indulgence or beverage that you really like to enjoy in the fall. Awesome. I know for me, I love creamy wild rice soup. And so I'm looking forward to continuing to eat and hopefully share that with my teammates and some friends too. But Allie, if you don't mind, if you want to go ahead and did you already hit record? Okay, sorry. I'm trying to pull up my screen. I wasn't totally sure. But I appreciate that. But welcome everyone to our Lunch and Learn Grief and Trauma Informed Mentoring. I'm excited to be here along with my partners, Sarah and Allie, who will introduce themselves here in a second. And we're also excited to be joined by the leadership team of a program that are really champions in this work of grief and trauma informed mentoring, Girls Rise Up, in partnership with Big Brothers Big Sisters. I'm Emily Garai. I'm the program director here at Mentor Minnesota. I use she, her pronouns. Again, I'm joined by my teammates, Sarah. I'll kick it over to you first, and then Allie.
Hi, everybody. My name is Sarah Shafer. I'm the executive director at Mentor Minnesota. My pronouns are she, her, and I love all of the love for pumpkin spice because it is my favorite season of all. It's hard not to love pumpkin spice, especially when we're in the Midwest. And I'll introduce Allie Irvig, our program Vista.
Hello, I'm Allie, the program coordinator Vista. I use she, her pronouns, and I'm also super into the pumpkin and squash. So
awesome. Yeah, so keep sharing those as we're diving in today. I always like to see things that we have in common that we like to enjoy and things that are maybe a new inspiration of something to take away. Speaking of takeaways, for today, we really want to enhance the current knowledge around the concepts of trauma, ACEs, and grief. And we are going to cover a lot of material at a pretty steady pace and at a high level. But recognizing that we have limited time with all of you, we're going to kind of just keep things rolling and allowing for Girls Rise Up to have enough time to talk about their program and allow for some questions at the end. So just with that in mind. We would also like to propose some strategies for grief and trauma-informed mentoring practices. Really some strategies that are, some on the ground takeaways that you can take with you today, and provide some tools for how programs can respond to grief and trauma within this programming. And again, we're going to be hearing from the champions in this work from Girls Rise Up, and then facilitate and provide some additional resources. And I will be sending out a wraparound email to all of you with some additional information and contact info as well.
So a little bit about Mentor Minnesota. We are an agency that really supports holistic youth development, and we want to make sure that you feel supported as youth practitioners, people that work with young people, to best be able to support them. So our overall mission is to create quantity and quality of mentoring programs and mentoring experiences for all of you. And we do that through elevating quality, engaging local leadership, which is why in part we've asked both Una and Shadia to come here today to talk about their experience with grief-informed mentoring. Expand the movement, so make sure that more people have access to it, and influence systems to be more youth-led. And so with that, since this is ultimately about you, I know that you have already told us all of your favorite delicious squash and pumpkin and fall apple recipe ideas, but we'd love to know who you are. Could you please tell us your name and pronoun, what organization you're with, and then maybe one thing that you've done for self-care in the past week, or what do you like to do when you do self-care? And I can start again, Sarah Shafer, she, her. I'm at Mentor Minnesota. And something I really have loved doing lately is going on long walks with my dog while listening to audiobooks. So if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit about you in the chat, because we're going to come back to these self-care tips more towards the end. And as you're doing that, I will say that all of the information here and all of the information that we at Mentor Minnesota support is evidence-based and based on empirical research. We really believe that this entire field can be and should be informed by research. And so if you're interested in learning more at any point in time about youth development, we encourage you to check out our website at mentormn.org, or you can go to mentor.org, which is our national affiliate, to look at the best practices that we utilize. Namely, we really focus on the elements of effective practice, and want to help you support your program by utilizing best practice. So we'll make sure to add that in to the end of the email.
And with that, as we asked you to go ahead and share in the chat some things that you maybe like to do for self-care, we're going to be talking about that a little bit further down the line as well, or, kind of continue to talk about it. But grief and trauma can be heavy, talking about this. And so we want to just take a moment, just a few seconds, to kind of gather ourselves, gather our thoughts, and really be present. So you're free to turn your camera off if you want, maybe do a little neck stretching or take some deep breaths. And just, again, kind of center ourselves as we dive into this. And with that, I want to mention too, that if at any point you have some questions, go ahead and pop those into the chat, and we'll have an opportunity at the end to go over some questions. But as we go, if something comes up in your mind, go ahead and share it in there, and then we'll come back to it at the end. So with that, I'm just going to play, and I really put this on there. We're not going to let it play for its full 3 minutes, but Calm is a really great resource when it comes to offering some different meditation practices and breathing techniques. And so I shared this in the slide deck that we'll share out with all of you, just so you can kind of get a little sample. But again, feel free to turn your camera off for just a few seconds, do a little stretching, or take 3 deep breaths, and then we'll keep going. Okay, I love Calm. It's such a good, tool, if you will, to kind of help even during the day. I think all of us, as we get busy and our calendars are full and we're often in back-to-back meetings, it's good to always, be mindful of self-care and things that we can do to be mindful without the day. So I encourage you, all of that, when we share this out, to go ahead and dive in to see what some of the resources are for practicing some mindfulness. So today we're talking about grief and trauma-informed mentoring. And so what does it mean to be trauma-informed, and really why, does it matter? Well, I love this, this quote, and this is from Child Trends, that research suggests that trauma-informed care is associated with considerable benefits for children and their families, including reductions in children's behavior problems and post-traumatic stress. So what is trauma? And I know that many of you have probably heard of it, or have some background knowledge to what trauma is. And again, this is just going to be kind of a high level. But, excuse me, I have to go back. But trauma results from an event series of events that often is circumstances experienced by an individual as physically or emotionally harmful, or life-threatening, with lasting adverse effects on the individual's functioning. And that's their mental, physical, social, emotional, and really spiritual well-being. I'm not going to go over this entire chart, but I invite you to go ahead and look at it, at some point. For today's purposes, we're going to really focus on the acute category of trauma, but there are acute, chronic, complex, and historical racial types of trauma. Again, today's focus being on acute, and that's really an isolated incident with the emphasis really on unexpected loss or the death of someone that we know. So, but again, the chronic being more repeated or prolonged, complex being multiple traumatic events, and historical and racial. So that's really a collective and cumulative trauma experiences from people. So again, but with our focus being today on the acute. Oh, Sarah, you're muted. Sorry.
Of course. Thanks, Emily. So when we're talking about trauma, we often like to couch this conversation within ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. Some of you might know, but between 1995 and 1997, Kaiser Permanente did the first ever real study of trauma on young people. And through this study, they found that there were a series of incidents that might have happened either in an acute instant or over time that compounded to create traumas that we call ACEs, or adverse childhood experiences. And an ACE is a traumatic event that happened once, multiple times between the ages of 0 and 17 that may have had a negative impact on that young person. And throughout the study, they realized that for folks that had those ACEs, or those traumatic experiences in childhood, the likelihood then of them having long-term health impacts was much higher. It led to injury, a lack of opportunity or lack of taking opportunity, chronic disease, and risky behaviors, among many other things. But it could undermine a child's sense of well-being. So it was a really destabilizing, it had a really destabilizing impact on that young person. Through this study too, they found that 2/3 of all humans, regardless of socioeconomic status or race, experienced an ACE, but that those were much higher for specifically girls and all people of color. And so when we're looking at ACEs, it's important for us to think about how can we support people who have had ACEs, or how can we lessen their impact and eventually make sure that they don't happen for any young people in the future. So what are the domains of ACE? They kind of mirror what we might see in, say, mandated reporting, but abuse, neglect, household dysfunction, and racism and historical trauma, which there have been many more resources, especially in the last few years, on racism and historical trauma and the impact that historical or inherited trauma has had on young people. But those are the 4 main areas of which we're looking. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that looks like on the brain, how that might impact a young person who's had that.
So how trauma impacts the brain. So I know a lot of us likely didn't study anatomy and physiology. I happen to love all of that, but again, won't dive in too deep. But I think as you look at this picture and you kind of recognize there's 3 different areas of the brain that become underactivated when we're stressed or experiencing trauma. The prefrontal cortex, so our thinking center, becomes underactivated. Our memory center, the hippocampus, becomes underactivated, and our emotion regulation center becomes underactivated. And then our fear center, so if you're thinking of when we're stressed or experiencing trauma, and that, the fight or flight or freeze response really takes off. And that's because when we're experiencing trauma or high levels of stress, that fear center becomes overactivated. And again, thinking then, so you've got this overreaction from that fear center, and then an underreaction or really underactivation from thinking and thinking clearly, our memories, and again, sort of our emotional regulation. And so this, really helps to explain a little bit of why sometimes young people suffering from trauma or grief often exhibit fear, anxiety, extreme stress response. And even though a stimulus might not be connected, that they can still have this occurring. And that again is because that part of the brain, that fight, flight, or freeze response is really overactivated. So looking at this, some impacts of childhood trauma, and as Sarah shared about ACEs and, the study that was done, and knowing, really how our brain on a high level kind of responds to stress and trauma. We learned, and again, I'll share a lot of this out so you can look at it a little bit more closely, but I think a few things that I'll just point out are, as we just talked about, the cognition. So sometimes the impacts of trauma, they can impair readiness to learn, or language delays. Emotions, it can be difficult to sort of self-regulate and really understand what's happening, and maybe overreact or underreact to certain situations. And the other part too, I'll point out, is mental health. So you can often see an increase in depression, increase in anxiety, maybe negative self-image. Again, a lot of that being related to sort of that stress response of that impact that trauma had.
So we've talked a little bit about how trauma impacts the brain, and in short, it has really huge long-term impacts on how a person might respond to stress or handle new stresses. And I know, even just looking at the chat and how folks decompress on their own time, a lot of those ways that you decompress are probably learned, or maybe you've developed a habit over time. For a lot of young people, they might not have that same access to the ability to unwind. And it can be a lot harder, especially if you don't have agency when you're a young person in a stressful environment. And so what I'd like for us to do, and you can put this in the chat, you can meditate on this on your own, but I'd love to have a few, maybe like 2 people share out who supported you and who made you feel supported. And I can kick this off too by saying that, I encourage everybody to take the ACEs test. It's free on the CDC website. We'll make sure to link that. I had 6 on the ACEs, which felt pretty high to me, but I did have a pretty stressful upbringing. And then when I think about who supported me, I always think back to my, I had in middle school through high school, my French horn teacher, Mr. Whitener, Bill Whitener, and he was the first person who helped me mirror my emotions, understand what I needed to relax, gave me an opportunity to talk through my feelings, and he really completely changed my life. I think about him all the time. I'm still in contact with him, and he's such a wonderful resource for me. And so I want you to think, you don't have to share your ACEs. You don't really have to share anything you're not comfortable with, but I'm curious who in your life, when you were a young person, really might have been that person. So I see your maternal grandmother. Thank you so much, Arlene. That's beautiful. Yes. We all have these people who really help support us, and I want you to think about who that might have been. Friends and a therapist, listening and validating, absolutely. And if anybody wanted to unmute themselves and share, you're welcome to. Again, you do not have to, but I'd be curious to hear these real person stories.
I can talk. I'm Shetty, and you'll hear from me in a little bit. But I had a lot of nannies growing up because my dad traveled on the road, and a lot of them were teachers because I just worked with our schedule. And so they were role models to me and mother figures in my life. And I still do have close relationships with each of them. But I think about them now probably more than ever as I am an adult and parent.
Thanks, Shadia. That's beautiful. And it seems like you and Katie had a similar experience with babysitters who turned out to be long-term mentors. Yeah, that's lovely. Emily, do you want to move on to the next spot? So that was a lead into this idea of protective factor supports. We know we're in this mentoring world because we know and believe and see the power of relationships. And we truly view mentoring as one of the protective factors that could support young people from having much more negative long-term consequences to their health. And so again, I mentioned that I had an ACEs score of 6, but I also had so many amazing mentors and so many amazing adults in my life who helped me work through those issues. And so mentoring can be a really powerful way to not necessarily fully combat ACEs and fully combat trauma, but provide a really amazing resilience resource for young people. Other strategies, and again, this is all based on research from the CDC, are strengthening economic supports to families, making sure families have money, they're not in poverty, promoting social norms that protect against violence and adversity, so teaching conflict resolution. These are things that mentoring programs are also doing. Ensuring a strong start for children, teaching skills. I think in mentoring and as teachers, we do this regularly. Connecting youth to caring adults and intervening to lessen immediate and long-term harm. So truly in this business of mentoring, we are in the business of mitigating harm. Mentoring can be a really powerful way to allay those negative experiences.
Thanks, Sarah. And thank you everyone for sharing and sharing in the chat, and Shadia and Sarah for sharing out. I love to hear, people's story, and it helps to connect us all together, I think. But in recognizing the importance of, and really the impact that mentoring can have on young people, especially those that have experienced ACEs or trauma, grief. There's the 4 R's of trauma-informed mentoring. So these are sort of 4 things to really be aware of when it comes to best practice. And again, a lot of data and research behind these 4 R's. The first one being to realize. So realize that the widespread impact of trauma. Data and statistics show that many of us have on some level experienced ACEs. And a lot of us gathered here today know and recognize what it means to lose a loved one and to be going through that. So really just realizing that. The second one, recognize. So that's recognizing the signs and symptoms of trauma, as I know we kind of did, high level of sort of that, the brain's response and how that impacts, the fight, flight, or freeze, overreacting, and really, the rest, the memory and self-regulation is kind of put on hold. And so recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma, especially with our youth and our mentees, and also recognizing it with our mentors, those of us that are, within the networks of our people, our family, and our staff. The third being respond. So respond by fully integrating knowledge about trauma. So that's integrating this knowledge and practices into policies, into procedures, into our mentoring practices, and having that background, that foundational knowledge as we're creating these systems. And the last that I'll go into a little bit deeper is the resist re-traumatizing, the re-traumatization of our youth. So those that we're working with, we want to make sure that we are, we're doing, to do no harm, and that we are making sure that our practices and our policies and the way that we engage are not creating more trauma in of itself. So I'm going to focus just a little bit, and then we're going to introduce our special guest today, our program that we're excited to share, but some tools to resist re-traumatization. So these are just some really things that I hope that, the takeaway here being important things to keep in mind when we are practicing trauma-informed mentoring. And the first one being, learn as much as you can. I often visualize my moccasins and walk softly, meaning I don't know everyone's story. And so when we are working and engaging with folks that we're learning and coming from a place of curiosity and support and really learning as much as we can. The second one, grow your skills of attunement. That's really developing your skills to recognize social cues. So, maybe young people are not necessarily responding how we think they should, but rather, kind of learn and come from a place of curiosity to ask more questions and really learn to recognize social cues with that. Look for the cause of the behavior. So check assumptions at the door, right? We say that just mentoring 101 to come from a place of curiosity and don't just assume, but rather look for some causes or maybe engaging in bigger conversations. The next one, use person-centered strength-based thinking. So really focusing on what someone can do versus what they can't. Maybe it's not in their capacity to do maybe a social event. So really, think of what can they do? Maybe they're really good at one-to-one meetings. So then you focus on that strength-based thinking. Provide consistency and choice-making opportunities. Consistency helps people feel safe. And I think first and foremost, in order to be providing care and really fostering a positive mentoring experience, is we want young people to feel safe. So by providing that consistency, that's one of the biggest tools. And the last, and as we've talked about kind of throughout this presentation so far, is to recognize the importance of self-care. I think care of self is essential in order to care for others. So we're really keeping that in mind as we move forward.
So since we have talked a little bit about what trauma looks like and how we can approach people who've experienced trauma, I want to take a moment and introduce Girls Rise Up, which I'll pass it over to Shadia and Yuna in just a moment. But we at Mentor Minnesota have been really impressed with Girls Rise Up because they are a program for bigs and littles who have experienced the loss of a mother. And they match girls who've lost their mothers with adults who have also lost their mothers. And as we had talked about with the 4 R's of mentoring, being able to respond to a trauma, to resist re-traumatization is really important. And having someone who understands what has happened in your life can be really powerful, because then you can share that moment versus having to retell it or reopen. And so I would love to introduce our 2 speakers today, Shadia Topkin and Yuna Zhang, who we'll talk a little bit more about how they support trauma-informed mentoring and grief-informed mentoring at their work.
Thank you, Sarah. I just first want to thank Mentor Minnesota for having us be a part of your Lunch and Learn. It's been so much fun getting to know you guys and the work that you do. So I'm really grateful to you for putting this on today. I wanted to share a little bit about my story and how it connects to Girls Rise Up. I lost my mom when I was 13 years old from cancer. And at that time, I didn't know anybody else who had lost their mom. I grew up in a really small town, and it was very isolating. And I had a great childhood, but also I just stuffed those feelings deep down, as many people do when they lose a parent that young. And so it wasn't until I was like a few years ago, 35 years old, that I became a part of She Climbs Mountains, which is the adult nonprofit group. And that has been a game changer for me. And while I was involved in that, we decided, this is so beneficial to all of us as adults. We need to help these kids so that we can help, the future of motherless daughters. And so in 2019, we launched Girls Rise Up and had an amazing event pre-COVID. I wish we could go back to those days. And just had so much support. And then, as we all know, a pandemic is happening. And I'm really proud of what we've still accomplished in almost the 2-year time frame. And I'd love to share it with all of you. So let me see, anything else? No, continue on. So a little bit about our programming. We serve motherless daughters ages 8 to 18 years old. We have 2 pieces of our puzzle. We have a mentor program and we have gatherings. For the mentor program, we partner with Big Brothers Big Sisters of Twin Cities, and we match adult motherless daughters with girls who have experienced mother loss. And then we have gatherings, which provides an opportunity for girls who all experience the same type of loss to join together in community. You do not have to be a part of both programs. You can just attend gatherings, or you can just be a part of the mentor program. And then any gatherings that we do are in the mentor program. There is no cost to the girls. Go to the next slide. The goals for the mentor program are to create connection between the youth motherless daughters and the adult motherless daughters. And we're not looking for them to be their mother, but to be able to provide mother-like care and guidance, which is something, I didn't have. So I think it's really beneficial. And then also to support relationships between the mentors and the mentees to inspire girls to grow and maintain their self-confidence and self-worth. And that is something that is a big topic for us, and a gathering that we are currently doing right now, and I'll talk about a little bit later. The goals for our gatherings are to provide opportunities for the youth to be able to connect with one another, and we've done so many fun gatherings. They're fun, creative, interactive, and community building activities. And yes, some of them have been virtually, but whenever we get the chance, we definitely try to meet in person, because we all know that is so important in a physical distance way. And then also to create community for the youth motherless daughters, so they're able to navigate with the world with others who truly understand the loss of a mother. And so I also want to share about how Girls Rise Up incorporates trauma-informed mentoring. But before I do that, I wanted to provide you some information that we've learned. The death of a parent in a child is a traumatic experience. An estimated 3.5% of children under 18, which is 2.5 million people in the US, have experienced the death of their parent, which is like mind-blowing to me. Evidence suggests that strong mentoring relationships can help youth to recover and thrive after experiencing traumatic experience, such as the death of a parent. And trauma-informed mentoring can help the grieving build resiliency. And I think that is a term that we use so much, not with just in Girls Rise Up, within She Climbs Mountains, that all of these girls are just so resilient, but we want to provide them with the tools to continue being resilient in life, and also, share their stories. So by doing that, offer hope through promoting healing, help build protective factors, provide support through an empathetic lens, and then view challenges or behaviors that result from traumatic life experiences as opportunities to support the development of child's coping and life skills. Sorry, that was a mouthful. I couldn't just wing that one. So you can go to the next slide. How does Girls Rise Up incorporate trauma-informed methods? In a few different ways. For our gatherings, we always start our gatherings with everybody sharing their story. And this creates connection, and it's also one of the best ways that we've all realized to heal. So for example, a girl would share, for me, I'm Shadia. I lost my mom when I was 13 years old. My mom's name is Hattie. She was 45 years old when she died, and I miss her because blah, blah, blah. And people sometimes elaborate more, and other times it's less, and that's fine. It's whatever the girls are comfortable with. But we model this for them every time so that it gets easier as time goes on. And then at the end of each gathering, we always do a gratitude practice of something that you're grateful for. And that could be mother related or not, which is fine. Because we think it's important to always feel gratitude and feel appreciated for what we have in the world. And then when it comes to the mentor-mentee relationships and caregivers, we did a training with the mentors and caregivers called Understanding Grief in Youth, and it proved to be extremely helpful, and we'll definitely do more of these gatherings in the future. And then our mentors incorporate the Trauma-Informed Care Roadmap, the CLICC, developed by Big Brothers Big Sisters, which incorporates comfort, listen, inspire, collaborate, and celebrate. Go to the next slide, unless there's anything down below that. Oh, sorry, there's something down below that. I apologize. You can go up one. It was cut off on my screen. I wanted to introduce to you Yuna, who is our partner in crime with Big Brothers Big Sisters. And I'd love for you to share, Yuna, a little bit about what you and your team do with Girls Rise Up, and then also the specific match story.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for introducing us so well, Shadia, and thank you everyone for joining us today. And so it's truly an honor and a privilege just to be partnership with Girls Rise Up to She Comes Mountain. And myself, along with like 3 other teammates, a small team of 4, we support group matches. And so specifically with my role as the liaison is that I enroll all the participants into the program. So I meet all the big sisters, the volunteers, the little sisters and the families that are coming into the program. And then the funnest part of my job is matching everybody. And so I definitely, like I tell folks, it's extremely fun. I love just the matching and making the magic happen. Essentially, of course, like with Girls Rise Up, I feel like it's so intentional, and that's what makes it so beautiful, is that you're matching folks that have like similar shared experiences with each other. And that's something that you just, obviously you cannot replace, but it's also a comfort and a space where folks can come together to be safe and to find healing throughout that process. And so with that being said too, it's just I know that up there I have the photos there, so I wanted to talk a little bit more about this match story from my coworker King, who's also on this call as well too. And so thank you for sharing this with me, King. And so with this is, as you can tell on the right, upper right here is little sister Peyton and big sister Courtney. So Courtney's on the left and then Peyton's on the other side. But with this, they've been matched for like almost like a year now, where like they've been together for 9 months, and ultimately, you know, just really they met throughout the pandemic. And so as you can tell how awkward, weird, and just not normal that can feel in the beginning. And so so they were able to be introduced virtually. We use Zoom and Google Hangouts as like the 2 platforms that we champion in. But once they started meeting, they ultimately started going in person too. So as you can tell from the bottom picture in the summer, they've been able to go, you know, canoeing and paddleboarding over at Lake Harriet, and just really able to try new experiences. And so some of the things that I hear from folks is they're just so grateful that we have this opportunity. They wish that like this was an opportunity for them when growing up, just like as Shadia had mentioned too. And so ultimately the reason why I shared these kind of stories is because we know this is what works. And we know that like these are experiences that can continue to grow and help folks grow in life. And so this is something like I always say, like a survivor story. Like this person went through it, and so can I. And so yeah. And so I think that is all I had, Shadia. And so you can continue.
That's so great. I mean, to add on to that, I have known Peyton from the beginning, and she has just grown so much, probably just naturally in life. But since her relationship has begun with Courtney, I mean, her self-confidence is so high. I actually was on this canoe with her in this picture, and she was so terrified of the water and just so nervous and really didn't talk very much, and that's fine. But now in another time, like 6 months later, Courtney and Peyton, Peyton wanted to go canoeing and spend that time with Courtney. So I love their relationship, and I'm just so glad to see her come out of her shell. So thank you, Yuna. I really appreciate that.
Absolutely.
A little bit about Girls Rise Up and our accomplishments. We have 25 girls to date. And no, not all 25 come to every gathering. We typically have around 10 to 12 girls at each gathering. We have 11 matches currently and 2 pending. In 2020, we did care packages. We did a self-care care package and then a Mother's Day care package, which was actually a fairy garden that the girls got to put together with their caregivers in honor of their moms. In 2020, we did 10 gatherings, which I will talk a little bit through those a little bit later. And then this year we've done 7 gatherings thus far, and more to come. So here's just a few examples of the gatherings that we have done. This was our second gathering, and it was a friendship gathering. And just to look at these girls and see even how little they were even 2 years ago is just mind-blowing to me. But every girl, again, shared their story, made friendship bracelets, and then we also talked about friendships in their current life. And, you know, what does it mean to have a good friend? And can you trust your friends? Are you able to share your stories with your friends? And so that was a really, really fun, positive event. Then we did the picnic and paddle, which is what I was talking about before. Oh yeah, you see us in the bottom photo. And we had dinner, and we had actually, some of our events incorporate mentors and some don't, just depending on what's a good fit. And for this one, we did have the mentors there, and it was just a blast on Lake Nokomis to do paddleboarding and canoeing and kayaking. This was last year. We did a corn maze, which again, we had our mentors there. And you know, some of our gatherings, we tend to have more intentional conversation about our moms and our loss. And other times we just want to have fun, and that's okay too. Especially with the year that we've all gone through. Sometimes it just needs to be lighthearted, and this was definitely a lighthearted experience that was a bit competitive to get through that corn maze. So it was a blast. We did gingerbread houses, not ideally how we'd want to do a holiday gathering, but we let every girl pick out which gingerbread house, shipped it to them, and then we spent the afternoon creating our gingerbread houses, and then also talking about what our plans were for the holidays and how we were going to, each of us, to remember our moms during the holidays. This was our first year, our first annual Mother's Day brunch, which was incredible. It like gets me teared up just thinking about it. And again, we had mentors and girls there and had such a great attendance. We had a beautiful brunch, and then every girl got to make a wreath and then share a little bit about your mom. We actually ended up making a poem up with adjectives that all the girls described about their moms, which was just so sweet. And what we're currently doing is an I Am Empowerment workshop. It's a series of 3 workshops with a kickboxer named Lisa Van On, and she's amazing. I don't know if you guys have ever worked with her before, but she is incredible. She just knows how to talk to kids and how to get out information from them and get them involved. And it's just been so great working with her. And tomorrow night is actually our last empowerment workshop, where we're going to have also an Italian dinner. But it's just amazing how she gets these girls out of their shells. And this is just ways to connect us via social media. So I think that's all I had to share, and I feel like I talked too long. So back to you.
No, not at all. And I know a few folks have asked for the slide deck, and I will be sharing that with all of you so that you get all of this information, in addition to some contact information if you'd like to get a hold of Shadia or Yuna or myself, Sarah, you know, to ensure that you get all of that. So, but thank you for sharing that. I love pictures. I love hearing stories. Again, I think it's so powerful, and it helps connect us all together. And also, you know, highlighting, or that you were able to highlight some of these spaces of joy, along with, you know, the importance of self-care. I think really providing these spaces of joy, that, you know, and empowerment, how powerful that can be to provide those spaces for young people that are, you know, going through trauma or grief, or, you know, just their experience in general. I think really trying to remember how important that is. And even amidst the pandemic, I think the need for connection and creating these spaces of fun, and even for us as adults and caregivers and mentors, to provide and remember some of that and how important that is. But I appreciate everyone and your input and your stories. So I'm going to open up the floor to questions that folks may have. And I'll stop sharing so I can see all of your faces a little bit better. I know some folks maybe had to bounce out a little bit too, but I know Shadia, I was going to ask, I'll maybe kick it off too. In some of these empowerment series, I'm really curious to know, and, you know, is this the first time that you were in partnership with, you know, the kickboxing, and, you know,
Yep.
Okay. And how often are you,
Yeah, it was our summer series that we started in. So we did one in June, and then we took July off because that's really busy with summer for everyone. We did one in August, and then we're doing our last one now. And each of them were about 2 hours long. We feel like that's kind of a good time frame. And then tomorrow night is 3 hours because we're doing a yummy Italian dinner. But it was our first time working with Lisa. We have so many fun ideas, you know, planned for the future. And so I feel like everything kind of keeps coming into place when it comes to these gatherings, and everyone is just so generous with their time too. And so far they've been really good fits. So.
Yeah, that's wonderful, you know, because I know it has been definitely a challenge, I think, for programs to, you know, create these spaces. And how do you, I know the word has been used a lot, but pivot, you know, but being able to, you know, really needing to lean into being creative and reaching out to folks for other ideas on how to create engagement. And I know you mentioned too that you use the platform of Zoom. And then
Yep.
do you Google Hangout too, I believe you said?
We've been using Zoom primarily
Okay.
for our gatherings that have been virtual.
Okay.
And it's a something, right? It's something that we can do, and it's nice to have something tangible like the gingerbread houses, but ideally we want to be together, but
yeah. And I think that's, you know, great inspiration too, when you said like the kits, but sending out these kits. And I know that there's a few other programs that we've connected with that have talked about sending out these materials so that when the mentor and mentee are connecting, then they have something tangible like in their hands to either cooking together or creating something together or laughing and having fun together, you know, if it's doing silly dances or whatever it might be. But I think having some of those kits and materials are important too.
Absolutely.
I have a question for you, Shadia, and really this is open to anybody on the call, but for young people who've experienced the loss of a parent, whether or not it's a young girl or a boy or someone non-binary, anybody, are there any other resources that you would recommend we all look out for? I know that you're connected with a grief center, but I'd be curious what sorts of tools you have in your toolbox that you'd like to share with all of us.
I'm pulling up our website because I'm like, we work with so many. We partner with Brighter Days a lot. And then also oh my goodness, give me a second here. Continue on. Everyone else, feel free to add in. Not everybody talk at once.
I know sometimes too. And it's always in those moments where you really want to pull that information and then it completely and just decides to exit your mind a little bit. So
We literally have a grid of so many that I can share afterwards, but we do partner with a large group of people, especially because so many boys, you know, are parentless as well. And so we don't currently offer that, but it's nice to be able to give them other resources as well.
For sure. And I'll make sure. Oh, go ahead.
No, I wasn't going to say anything else.
Oh,
Brad, go for it.
Okay. Also in the sense of related resources, are there organizations who help young women over the age of 18 who are about to lose their mother? In other words, just back the timing up to, and I guess the question could apply to any age person of any gender or age, I guess, but your specialty is young girls and young women. So,
But we do also serve, I know that it's like the in-between of it. We probably don't serve, but are still, an open ear. But we have She Climbs Mountains, which is for adult motherless daughters, so 19 on up. And then the girls is 8 to 18. So we do, which is what I'm a part of and on the board of is She Climbs Mountains. And that is a wonderful organization where we have workshops and coffee and conversation and similar things that we do with girls, but a little bit different as well.
Well, and the difference would be that for the girls or the She Climbs Mountains, her mother is dying of cancer, and it may be up to a year before it actually happens. And so that just seems like it folds in naturally, that you wouldn't need to have the grief. You already have the grief happening.
Correct. And you know what, I put in the link are resources that we have on our page of local support. Angel Foundation, I know, is one, and they provide support to local adults with cancer and their families. So that would be also a good option in that. We have Brighter Days in here, Children's Grief Connection, which is an amazing organization that we have also partnered with. I just blanked when you asked me that. Sorry, Sarah. Gilda's Club. There's so many great organizations in here. So feel free to dig through that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I also know a lot of counties, especially in Minnesota, there's one in Hennepin, do grief groups for adults who've experienced a loss. And I can link the one to Hennepin because that's just the one that I had off the top of my head. But I think the power of communion comes up so often and time again when we're talking about how to support people who've experienced grief. And so I love, Shadia and Yuna, that your organization is part of that work because there needs to be more of it. And so I am so excited that you are around and growing. And I'll also link, you said Brighter Days, so I'll link that in here, but we'll make sure to have that in the resources that we send out.
for sure. And I know that Ramsey County also does similar, I think, to Hennepin County, but I'll link that as well. But I think those are some good places too, as far as folks that are, going through or in need of additional support with cancer and illness. So I'm glad that you brought that up, Brad, because it's definitely, yeah, I mean, it's here, and it's a tough and heavy thing to talk about, but, leaning into that and how can we best support families and our young people that are experiencing that, I think is something that we can all maybe do a little bit better, and looking for ways to really infuse these programs that do support, young people that are going through grief and trauma, and, just different ways. And even if we're not at the capacity to volunteer, perhaps that's connecting with your businesses that you're working with or your networks of people, or joining a committee, things like that. But there are many ways I think that we could all continue to infuse these programs.
Do I see a difference between, a lot of programs of grief counseling and what Shadia is offering, which is non-professional social and personal support in groups with activities? So I don't know how many of those resources you listed would do what Shadia does, but that would be especially useful to make that distinction between I don't know what you'd call it, but a mentoring group mentoring activity support as opposed to counseling.
Yeah, I do want to acknowledge that we are not therapists. We do not, that is not our forte, and we do not go down that route. And we provide recommendations when that comes up as well, because we know our limits. We are the people, not just, but we are the people who have gone through a similar thing that they have, and we can commiserate and be that person for them when there's nobody else in the world that feels that they can connect to in that way. I also wanted to say that if you guys know of any, youth motherless daughters, send them our way. We do have a team of outreach, of people who do outreach to schools and therapists and churches and funeral homes. But if you guys know of any girls, feel free to send them our way. We know it's not the right fit for everybody. It's scary and it's hard and all those things, but I do think it's beneficial. I better if we're doing this.
Absolutely. I wish to add on to that, Shadia, too, is that, really essentially what the program is to open up the community, is to really let you know that we're your neighbors, we're here to support you guys, and just to offer really essentially a safe space where folks can get together and really talk about the experiences, or if not, do activities and just really like zone out and have fun together. And I want to include too, because I know that some like little sisters, if they're not ready to do like a mentoring program yet, they can just come and attend the events and whatnot, and that can kind of help them to slowly open up to someday down the road they can do a mentoring program with us. And so I really like how we have those two options for the girls to come through.
Yeah, I love that. I'm glad that you brought that up, Una. These other pathways that young people can get connected, even if the timing maybe isn't the best fit for them to jump in, but that there's still ways that they can connect and kind of see what it's all about. And sometimes, that just it's what it takes to kind of, the small steps and really observe first, and then maybe go in a different capacity later. So, yeah. And I'm also glad, Shadia, that you brought up to, and as Brad was talking about being therapists, but, essentially, when we're talking about at our different mentor trainings, what a mentor is and what a mentor is not. And therapist is not one of them. That, really mentors are the connectors and kind of the experience builders and the asset people that want to really point out all the strengths that young people have and all of these inherent talents and really foster that development. So, but I think, like I mentioned, I'm just excited that you are creating these spaces of joy and just fun. And sometimes just laughing, and I think amidst our world right now and the multiple pandemics that we're really in, I think providing that joy and laughter, and even like with the amazing empowerment series, which I feel like I need to be a part of just to kind of get kickstarted, but even that physical activity.
We are going to do that for adults because I need that in my life just as much. Trust me.
Yeah. And then that connects to the importance of self-care, right? That we have to take care of ourselves in order to care for others. And so not forgetting that that's not important, that it very much is. So, but I know we're right at our time, but if folks wanted to stay on and had other questions, I know we've got some time that we can stay on, but if you need to go, I want to be respectful of that. And thank you all again for joining us today. I'll definitely share out our upcoming events and all of our resources that were shared, including the slide deck from today and contact information for Girls Rise Up, Big Brothers, Big Sisters, and Mentor Minnesota. So again, thank you all for being here. Appreciate it.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Allie, can you hit the button? Thanks.